Good morning Year 4 and Happy New Year to everybody. Hope everybody is well. We're going to start our lesson this morning by looking at a new book. If you remember last term we were reading The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and this term we have a new book to read, and I'm going to be reading that over the next couple of weeks and giving you work to do at home around the book. So today we're looking at the front cover of the book and the blurb on the back of the book, and we're going to try and answer some questions about that, and then afterwards I'm going to read the first couple of chapters for you. Okay, so let's have a look at our book. Our book this term is The Butterfly Lion by Michael Morpurgo. Now, we've had a story about a lion last term, which was The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. This story is so different, but I think you're going to really enjoy it. If you look at these front covers, there's 3 different publishers here that have got a slightly different front cover. If you look on Teams, these are on Teams as well for you to have in front of you if you need them. Have a little think for a couple of minutes. What do you think the front cover is telling you? What are the key things on there? Just pause the video and have a little think about that. Well, what you should have come up with, children, is the fact that you've got the title of the story, The Butterfly Lion. You've got the title, the name of the author, Michael Morpurgo. You've got also the name of the illustrator, the person who drew the pictures in the story as well. On the back of the book, it reads this. This is the blurb on the back of the book. Remember, a blurb is always or usually found on the back. Sometimes it's on the inside cover, but it's usually on the back of a book. Have a think, what is a blurb for? Can you remember what it's for? Well, a blurb, remember, gives you a quick overview of the story, quick telling of the story, but it doesn't give too much away. It doesn't tell you all the really good bits about the story, but it really tries to make you think that you want to read the story because it sounds exciting, or it sounds interesting, or it just grabs your imagination. So let's have a look at this one. It starts with a little quote at the top. It says, "All my life I'll think of you. I promise I will. I won't ever forget you." And that's a quote directly from the story. And then underneath it tells you a little bit about this butterfly lion. It says, "Bertie rescues an orphaned white lion cub from the African veld. They are inseparable until Bertie is sent to boarding school far away in England and the lion is sold to a circus. Bertie swears that one day they will see one another again, but the butterfly lion ensures that their friendship will never be forgotten." Then there's another quote at the end of the blurb. It says, "The butterfly lion is unique among animals and books and will touch all hearts, both young and old." There's going to be some questions about the blurb coming up and on your task as well. Now, on the inside of the book, quite often on the inside of a book, you get quotes from other authors sometimes, or magazines or reviews or newspapers, and this gives you a bit more of an idea about the book as well. It gives you an idea of what to expect when you read this book. And so there are some really interesting quotes that I'm going to quickly read for you as well, and again you'll find it on your task because some of you have got questions to do with the quotes. The first one says, "A magical, mysterious story with the power to draw readers back again and again." The second one's interesting because it says, "This beautiful story of love and war has everything, even a great twist." Now, I'm looking at the front of that and it doesn't look like it's going to be a story about a war, but there is an element of war in this story. "This sensitive, highly visual story deserves to be recognised as a masterpiece." A masterpiece, one of those top stories, really, really brilliant stories. And another one there, "The most beautifully crafted story I've read for a long time." So looking at those quotes, it makes me think, oh, well, this story, it's obviously a beautiful story. It's obviously got a twist in it. It's obviously got a bit of love and a bit of war. From the front cover, it looks like it's about a lion, butterfly lion. What does that mean? So already, when I'm looking at the blurb and the front cover, I'm intrigued by the story. What I want you to do now, boys and girls, is pause the video, and I want you to look at the questions that are on Teams. There are two lots of questions. There are if you are somebody who in school normally uses Reading Plus, there is a green task for you to do, which is questions about the blurb and the front cover. If you are someone in school who doesn't have a Reading Plus account, then you are going to look at the red questions and try and answer those questions. When I come back to you on this will be Friday, I come back to you, we'll go through the answers quickly for those questions together before the next bit of the lesson. So pause the video, go and do the questions, and then come back and you'll find that I'll be reading the first couple of chapters of The Butterfly Lion to you. Michael Morpurgo, The Butterfly Lion. Butterflies live only short lives. They flower and flutter for just a few glorious weeks and then they die. To see them, you have to be in the right place at the right time. And that's how it was when I saw the butterfly lion. I happened to be in just the right place at just the right time. I didn't dream him. I didn't dream any of it. I saw him blue and shimmering in the sun one afternoon in June when I was young. A long time ago. But I don't forget. I mustn't forget. I promised them I wouldn't. I was 10 and away at boarding school in deepest Wiltshire. I was far from home and I didn't want to be. It was a diet of Latin and stew and rugby and detentions and cross-country runs and chilblains and marks and squeaky beds and semolina pudding. And then there was Basher Beaumont, who terrorised and tormented me so that I lived every waking moment of my life in dread of him. I had often thought of running away, but only once ever plucked up courage to do it. I was homesick after a letter from my mother. Basher Beaumont had cornered me in the boot room and smeared black shoe polish in my hair. I had done really badly in a spelling test and Mr. Carter had stood me in the corner with a book on my head. His favourite torture. I was more miserable than I had ever been. I picked at the plaster in the wall and determined that there and then I would run away. I took off the next Sunday afternoon. With any luck, I wouldn't be missed till supper, and by that time I'd be home. I climbed the fence at the bottom of the school park, behind the trees where I couldn't be seen. Then I ran for it. I ran as if the bloodhounds were after me, not stopping till I was through Innocent's Breach and out onto the road beyond. I had my escape all planned. I would walk to the station, it was only 5 miles, catch the train to London, then I'd get the underground home. I'd just walk in and tell them that I was never going back. There wasn't much traffic, but all the same I turned up my collar of my raincoat so that no one could catch a glimpse of my uniform. It was beginning to rain now, those heavy hard drops that mean there's more of the same on the way. I crossed the road and ran along the wide grass verge under the shelter of the trees. Beyond the grass verge was a high brick wall, much of it covered in ivy. It stretched away into the distance, continuous as far as the eye could see, except for a massive arched gateway at the end of the road. A great stone lion stood in the gateway. As I came closer, I could see he was roaring in the rain, his lip curled, his teeth bared. I stopped and stared up at him for a moment. That was when I heard a car slowing down behind me. I did not think twice. I pushed open the iron gate, darted through and flattened myself behind the stone pillar. I watched the car until it disappeared round the bend. To be caught would mean a caning, 4 strokes, maybe 6, across the back of the knees. Worse, I will be back to school, back to detentions, back to Basher Beaumont. To go along the road was dangerous, too dangerous. I would try to cut across the country to the station. It would be longer that way, but far safer. I was still deciding which direction to take when I heard a voice behind me. Who are you? What do you want? I turned. Who are you? She asked again. The old lady who stood in front of me was no bigger than I was. She scrutinised me from under the shadow of her dripping straw hat. She had piercing, dark eyes that I did not want to look into. I didn't think it would rain, she said, her voice gentler. Lost, are you? I said nothing. She had a dog on a leash at her side, a big dog. There was an ominous growl in his throat and his hackles were up all along his back. She smiled. The dog says you're on private property, she went on, pointing her stick at me accusingly. She edged aside my raincoat with the end of her stick. Run away from school, did you? Well, if it's anything like it used to be, I can't blame you. But we can't just stand here in the rain, can we? You'd better come inside. We'll give him some tea, shall we, Jack? Don't you worry about Jack. He's all bark and no bite. Looking at Jack, I found that hard to believe. I don't know why, but I never for one moment thought of running off. I often wondered later why I went with her so readily. I think it was because she expected me to, willed me somehow. I followed the old lady and her dog up to the house, which was huge as my school. It looked as if it had grown out of the ground. There was hardly a brick or a stone or a tile to be seen. The entire building was smothered in red creeper, and there were a dozen ivy-clad chimneys sprouting skywards from the roof. We sat down close to the stove in a vast kitchen. The kitchen's always the warmest place, she said, opening the oven door. We'll have you dry in no time. Scones? She went on, bending down with some difficulty and reaching inside. I always have scones on a Sunday. And tea to wash it down. All right with you? She went on chatting away as she busied herself with the kettle and the teapot. The dog eyed me all the while from his basket, unblinking. I was just thinking, she said, you'll be the first man I've had inside this house since Bertie. She was silent for a while. The smell of the scones wafted through the kitchen. I ate 3 before I even touched my tea. They were sweet and crumbly and succulent with melting butter. She talked on merrily again, to me, to the dog, I wasn't sure which. I wasn't really listening. I was looking out of the window behind her. The sun was bursting through the clouds and lighting the hillside. A perfect rainbow arched through the sky. But miraculous though it wasn't the rainbow that fascinated me. Somehow the clouds were casting a strange shadow over the hillside. A shadow in the shape of a lion, roaring like the one over the archway. Sun's come out, said the old lady, offering me another scone. I took it eagerly. Always does, you know. It may be difficult to remember sometimes, but there's always sun behind the clouds, and clouds do go away in the end, honestly. She watched me eat, a smile on her face that warmed me to the bone. Don't think I want you to go, because I don't. It's nice to see a boy eat so well, nice to have the company. But all the same, I'd better get you back to school after you've had your tea, haven't I? You'll only be in trouble otherwise. Mustn't run off, you know. You've got to stick it out, see things through, do what's got to be done. She was looking out of the window as she spoke. My Bertie taught me that, bless him. Or maybe I taught him. I can't remember now. And she went on talking and talking, but my mind was elsewhere again. The lion on the hillside was still there, but now he was blue and shimmering in the sunlight. It was as if he were breathing, as if he were alive. It wasn't a shadow anymore. No shadow is blue. No, you're not seeing things, the old lady whispered. It's not magic. He's real. He's our lion, Bertie's and mine. He's our butterfly lion. What do you mean? I asked. She looked at me long and hard. I'll tell you if you like. she said. Would you like to know? Would you really like to know? I nodded. Have another scone first and another cup of tea. Then I'll take you to Africa, where our lion came from, where my Bertie came from too. It's a bit of a story. I can tell you if you like. You ever been to Africa? No, I replied. Well, you're going, she said. We're both going. Suddenly, I wasn't hungry anymore. All I wanted now was to hear her story. She sat back in her chair, gazing out of the window. She told it slowly, thinking before each sentence, and all the while she never took her eyes off the butterfly lion, and neither did I. Bertie was born in South Africa, in a remote farmhouse near a place called Timbavati. It was shortly after Bertie first started to walk that his mother and father decided a fence must be put around the farmhouse to make a compound where Bertie could play safely. It wouldn't keep the snakes out, nothing could do that, but at least Bertie would be safe from now on. Safe from the leopards, the lions, the spotted hyenas. Enclosed within the compound were the lawn and gardens at the front of the house, and the stables and barns at the back. All the room a child would need or want, you might think, but not Bertie. The farm stretched as far as the eye could see in all directions, 20,000 acres of veld. Bertie's father farmed cattle, but times were hard. The rains had failed too often, and many of the rivers and waterholes had all but dried up. With fewer wildebeest and impala to prey on, the lions and leopards would sneak up on the cattle whenever they could. So Bertie's father was more often than not away from home with his men guarding his cattle. Every time he left, he'd say the same thing. Don't open the gate, Bertie, you hear me? There's lions out there, leopards, elephants, hyenas. You stay put, you hear? Bertie would stand at the fence and watch him ride out, and he would be left behind with his mother, who was also his teacher. There were no schools for hundreds of miles, and his mother too was always warning him to stay inside the fence. Look what happened in Peter and the Wolf, she would say. His mother was often sick with malaria, and even when she wasn't sick, she would be listless and sad. There were good days, days when she would play the piano for him and play hide and seek around the compound. Or he'd sit on her lap on the sofa out on the veranda, and she'd talk to him all about her home in England, and about how she hated the wildness and the loneliness of Africa, and about how Bertie was everything to her. They were rare days. Every morning he'd climb into her bed and snuggle up to her, hoping against hope that today she'd be well and happy, but so often she wasn't, and Bertie would be left on his own. There was a waterhole downhill from the farmhouse, and some distance away. The waterhole, when there was water in it, became Bertie's whole world. He would spend hours in the dusty compound, his hands gripping the fence, looking out at the wonders of the veld, at the giraffes, at the warthole, at the browsing impala, tails twitching, alert, at the warthogs snorting and snuffling under the shade of the trees, at the baboons, the zebras, the wildebeests, and the elephants bathing in the mud. But the moment Bertie always longed for was when a pride of lions came padding out of the veld. The impala were the first to spring away, then the zebra would panic and gallop off. Within seconds, the lions would have the waterhole to themselves, and they would crouch down to drink. From the safe haven of the compound, Bertie looked and learned as he grew up. But by now, he could climb the tree by the farmhouse and sit high in its branches. He could see better from up there. He would wait for his lions for hours on end. He got to know the life of the waterhole so well that he could feel the lions were there, even before he saw them. Bertie had no friends to play with, but he always said he was never lonely as a child. At night he loved reading his books and losing himself in stories, and by day his heart was out in the veld with the animals. That was where he yearned to be. Whenever his mother was well enough, he would beg her to take him outside the compound, but her answer was always the same. I can't, Bertie, your father has forbidden it. And that was that. The men would come home with their stories of the veld, of the family of cheetahs sitting, of the leopard they had spotted high in his tree, of the hyenas they had driven off, of the herd of elephants which had stampeded the cattle. And Bertie would listen wide-eyed, agog. Again and again he asked his father if he could go with him to help guard the cattle. His father just laughed, patted his head and said it was man's work. He did teach Bertie how to ride and how to shoot too, but always within the confines of the compound. Week in, week out, Bertie had to stay behind his fence. He made up his mind, though, that if no one would take him out into the veld, then one day he would go by himself. But something always held him back. Perhaps it was one of those tales he'd been told of black mamba snakes whose bite would kill you within 10 minutes, of hyenas whose jaws would crunch you to bits, of vultures who would finish off anything that was left so that no one would ever find even the bits. For the time being, he stayed behind the fence, but the more he grew up, the more his compound became a prison to him. One evening, Bertie must have been about 6 years old by now. He was sitting high up on the branches of his tree, hoping against hope that the lions might come down for their sunset drink. He was thinking of giving up, for it would soon be too dark to see, when he saw a solitary lioness come down to the waterhole. Then he saw that she was not alone. Behind her, and on unsteady legs, came what looked like a lion cub, but it was white, glowing white in the gathering gloomy dust. While the lioness drank, the cub played at catching her tail, and then, when she had her fill, the two of them slipped away into the long grass and were gone. Bertie ran inside, screaming with excitement. He had to tell someone. He found his father working at his desk. "Impossible," said his father. "You're seeing things that aren't there, and you're telling fibs." "I saw him, I promise," Bertie insisted. But his father would have none of it, and sent him to his room for arguing. His mother came to see him later. "Anyone can make a mistake, Bertie dear. It must have been the sunset to play tricks on you. There's no such thing as a white lion." The next evening, Bertie watched again at the fence, but the white lion cub and the lioness did not come. Nor did they the next evening, nor the next. Bertie began to think he must have been dreaming. A week or more passed, and there had only been a few zebras and wildebeest down at the waterhole. Bertie was already upstairs in his bed when he heard his father riding into the compound, and then the stamp of his heavy boots on the veranda. "We got her! We got her! Huge lioness, massive she was. She's taken half a dozen of my best cattle in the last 2 weeks. Well, she won't be taking any more." Bertie's heart stopped. In that one terrible moment, he knew which lioness his father was talking about. There could be no doubt about it. His white lion cub had been orphaned. "But what if," Bertie's mother was saying, "what if she had young ones to feed? Perhaps they are starving." "So would we be if we let it go on. We had to shoot her," his father said. Bertie lay there all night listening to the plaintive roaring echo through the veld, as if every lion in Africa was sounding a lament. He turned his face into his pillow and could think of nothing but the orphaned white lion. And he promised himself there and then that if ever the cub came down to the waterhole looking for his dead mother, then he would do what he had never dared do. He would open the gate and go out and bring him home. He would not let him die out there alone. But no lion cub came to the waterhole. All day, every day, he waited for him to come, but he never came. That's the end for today, children. See you soon. Thank you.